isn't really possible. On the air, Senator JD Vance ripped Elon Musk to shreds. At first, it looked like a normal political argument, but then Vance pulled out his phone and spewed something that made Musk pale. "You don't control the truth, Elon. And here is the proof." These words sounded like a bolt from the blue. The audience froze. Journalists shouted. Musk was confused for a second, but then his smile disappeared. He leaned over to the microphone and said something that the whole world is now discussing. What happens next? This is not just a scandal, it's a war. It happened live on air. During Elon Musk's keynote address at a high-profile event, Senator JD Vance abruptly stormed the stage, his presence shattering the carefully constructed atmosphere. Without warning, Vance grabbed the microphone and, with steely determination, declared, "This man is a threat to American democracy." His voice, loud and unyielding, reverberated throughout the auditorium, leaving little doubt that he meant every word. The room instantly fell into a grave silence. Every camera in the hall zoomed in on Musk, capturing his reaction in real time. Despite the chaos unleashed by Vance's interruption, Musk maintained a composed exterior. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. However, his eyes betrayed him. There was a chill in his gaze that suggested a deep, calculated resolve. Vance did not pause. He continued his tirade, his tone growing even more forceful with each word. "Elon Musk controls social media, manipulates elections, and influences politics more than any president ever could," he thundered. The accusation was a direct assault on Musk's reputation and power, and it was delivered with such intensity that the audience could only respond with a collective gasp. In that moment, every attendee sensed that history was being made. Journalists in the press row furiously scribbled notes and adjusted their cameras, understanding that this confrontation would dominate the headlines for days to come. The live broadcast transmitted every charged moment to millions of viewers across the nation. The stakes had suddenly escalated from a simple business presentation to a national debate on the influence of modern technology and politics. Musk, initially seated and seemingly detached, slowly rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, each step measured as he advanced towards the microphone. There was no rush in his demeanor, only a quiet intensity that spoke volumes. The room watched in rapt attention as the tech magnate closed the distance between himself and the man who had just challenged his authority so publicly. As Musk neared the microphone, his expression remained unreadable. The contrast between his calm and the charged energy emanating from Vance was stark. Vance's voice, echoing with fervor, continued to escalate the tension in the room. His words painted a picture of a dangerous confluence of power and influence, one that threatened the very foundations of American democracy. Each syllable was a calculated strike aimed at shaking the public's faith in established institutions. The mix of shock, disbelief, and anticipation was palpable. In a matter of seconds, a routine event had transformed into a battleground of ideas and ideologies. The stakes were no longer confined to the stage. They had spilled over into the broader discourse on media, technology, and governance. The tension reached a fever pitch as Musk's slow, deliberate approach signaled that his response was imminent. His silent advance created an almost unbearable suspense. The room, which had been electrified by Vance's bold declarations, now braced itself for the counterattack from one of the world's most influential figures. Vance's challenge had been simple yet explosive, to expose what he believed was an unchecked abuse of power. In his eyes, Musk was not merely a successful entrepreneur. He was a symbol of a growing threat, a man whose control over modern communication channels gave him an influence far beyond that of any elected official. The senator's rhetoric was unrelenting, and the evidence he hinted at promised to shake the very core of the nation's political structure. Now, as Musk reached the microphone, the atmosphere shifted again. The silence deepened, and the audience waited with bated breath. What would he say? The answer, it was whispered among those present, was expected to shock everyone. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only define the evening but also reverberate far beyond the walls of the auditorium. With one final, measured step, Musk positioned himself directly in front of the microphone. His presence commanded the room, and even the cameras seemed to focus solely on him. The moment was heavy with anticipation, as if the very air held its breath, waiting for the spark that would ignite the next phase of this unfolding drama. What will he say? The answer that shocks everyone. By that final moment, The stage had been transformed from a simple speaking engagement into a battlefield where words were the weapons, and every declaration carried the weight of history. The contest of ideas was far from over, and as Musk prepared to speak, every person present knew that they were witnessing the birth of a new chapter in a conflict that would soon engulf the nation. Elon Musk's smirk deepened as he fixed his gaze on Senator JD Vance. The air in the room grew thicker with anticipation. Musk's eyes betrayed a hint of amusement, as if he already knew that Vance's next words would stir up more than just mild controversy. In a measured tone, Musk broke the silence. JD, do you really understand what you're saying? Are you accusing me of wielding influence? Isn't it your duty to build a society that can resist manipulation? His voice carried a subtle challenge, laced with both irony and disdain. A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the hall. Every listener in the auditorium leaned in, captivated by the exchange. The tension was palpable as cameras and smartphones recorded every moment. For a split second, it seemed as though time itself had slowed down. The question hung in the air, unanswered, leaving the audience to wonder if Musk was baiting Vance into a verbal duel. But Senator Vance was not one to back down. With a steely determination, he met Musk's gaze and scoffed at the suggestion. "Let's set the record straight," he announced, his voice rising over the quiet murmur of the crowd. "Musk isn't just a businessman. He has privatized public discourse. His Twitter decides whom Americans will listen to." His words struck with the force of a carefully aimed bullet, leaving no doubt about his intent. Vance's tone was relentless and unyielding as he laid out his case. As his accusations echoed through the hall, the audience began to exchange uneasy looks. Whispers spread like wildfire among the crowd. Some nodded in agreement while others appeared visibly shaken by the gravity of the claim. The charged atmosphere was a mix of skepticism and alarm. All eyes remained locked on Musk, who continued to listen in silence. Then, in a dramatic turn, Vance reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. The movement was sudden and calculated, drawing even more attention. "And here's the evidence," he declared, holding the device high for all to see. The screen displayed a series of closed Twitter documents that Vance claimed were damning proof, clear-cut records showing that account moderation had been carried out under government directives, manipulated trends, and the systematic deletion of dissenting voices. The impact was immediate. For a few breathless seconds, the only sound was the collective intake of shock from the assembled crowd. Journalists in the press row leaned forward, their pens and recorders at the ready, understanding that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in a debate that would soon dominate national discourse. Despite the uproar, Musk maintained his composure. His previously impassive face now revealed subtle changes in his eyes, a flash of something unexpected that went beyond calm determination. There was a flicker of concern, a silent acknowledgement that Vance's evidence was more than a mere provocation. Musk's lips remained sealed as he absorbed the new turn of events, his internal calculations clearly racing. The charged silence returned, heavier now with uncertainty and disbelief. The senator's evidence, presented so boldly in the middle of a live broadcast, had turned the tide. It was as if every eye in the room was questioning whether they had just witnessed a carefully orchestrated coup of public opinion. Vance, emboldened by the reaction, continued to press his point with a force that bordered on defiance. But all the while, the question that loomed in everyone's mind was clear: what would Musk say next? The tech mogul, who had seemed unflappable moments before, now stood in the center of a rapidly evolving drama. His silence was not a sign of defeat, but rather the calm before a storm that promised to upend the narrative. As the seconds ticked by, the auditorium buzzed with an undercurrent of anxiety and anticipation. Vance's bold display had fractured the illusion of control that Musk had maintained until now. With every passing heartbeat, the stakes grew higher, and the outcome of this confrontation became more uncertain. The evidence on Vance's phone had set the stage for a dramatic counterattack, one that Musk had clearly not anticipated. The air was thick with the promise of further revelations and the possibility of a decisive blow that could shift the balance of power. What will happen next? Musk did not expect such a blow. Within minutes of the explosive confrontation, the major networks had seized control. CNN, Fox News, and the New York Times were all live, their tickers flashing the headline, "Exclusive. Revelation about Musk." The nation watched as the auditorium scene, already charged with political fire, morphed into a media battleground. Amid the swirling cameras and frantic reporters, Elon Musk made a move that turned the tide. With the eyes of millions fixed on him, he leaned forward toward the microphone. His voice, soft yet cutting, broke the heavy silence. JD, you know this is part of a bigger game, right? The words, delivered in a calm, measured tone, rippled through the room like a shockwave. Senator JD Vance, who had moments earlier been unleashing his accusations with relentless fury, froze. His confident facade wavered as confusion etched itself across his face. He had expected a direct counterattack, but Musk's remark introduced a completely unexpected twist. The senator's eyes darted around, searching for a clue, but found none. The shift in narrative left him disoriented, and for a brief moment, the certainty in his voice was replaced by uncertainty. Musk pressed on, his tone growing even more deliberate. You really think the US government was unaware of these documents? Or that they haven't been using Twitter just as I have? His words carried an unsettling logic, suggesting that the evidence Vance had brandished might not be an indictment of one man alone, but rather a piece of a much larger, murkier puzzle. The implication was unmistakable. Powerful government figures could be involved, and the control over public discourse might be far more systemic than anyone had assumed. The senator's face turned a shade paler. Vance had constructed his argument on the premise that Musk's unchecked influence was the sole danger. Now, confronted with Musk's revelation, that foundation began to crumble. His voice faltered, and he struggled to find a retort. The auditorium, which had already been steeped in tension, now buzzed with an electric sense of disbelief. Journalists, previously scribbling notes furiously, began to shout over one another, "Vance is playing with power." Their voices merged with the rising clamor of the crowd. The once orderly debate had dissolved into chaos, with every attendee sensing that the stakes had escalated far beyond a personal vendetta. The documents, once seen as definitive evidence of Musk's manipulation, were now cast in a different light, hinting at collusion and government complicity. For a moment, time seemed to slow as the implications sank in. Vance's earlier bravado was replaced by a dawning realization that he might have been led into a trap of his own making. The documents he had so confidently presented were now questionable, and the possibility that they were part of a larger, orchestrated strategy left him exposed. The shock of Musk's words was evident in every face. The debate had shifted from one man's influence to a broader, more dangerous confrontation involving the highest echelons of power. The cameras captured every nuance, the faltering stance of Vance, the unwavering gaze of Musk, and the mounting agitation in the hall. As the murmurs of disbelief grew louder, the atmosphere became almost tangible with tension. Every viewer at home, every journalist in the room, sensed that the moment was historic. Musk's tactical counter not only deflected the accusations but also redirected the narrative entirely. It was no longer about whether one man could control social media. It was about who else might be silently pulling the strings behind the scenes. With the audience hanging on every word, the gravity of Musk's statement became clear. He had transformed a personal confrontation into an indictment of systemic power. The possibility that government agencies had exploited Twitter in the same manner he had raised his voice about now loomed large over the proceedings. The unexpected twist had not only saved Musk's credibility but had also turned the tables on Vance. Now, as the uproar in the auditorium reached a fever pitch, the new reality was undeniable. The balance of power was shifting before everyone's eyes, and the implications of Musk's words would be debated for days to come. Now Vance is trapped. Musk has just shifted the blame to the government. Vance's anger was palpable. His face flushed a deep red as he glared at Musk, his eyes burning with indignation. "You want to say that this is normal? Do you really think a businessman should decide what is truth and what isn't?" he roared, his voice echoing across the auditorium. His words cut through the tension like a knife, and every listener in the room felt the weight of his accusation. Musk, standing near the microphone with an unruffled demeanor, let out a short, amused laugh. The sound was dismissive, almost mocking. With a slight tilt of his head and a confident smirk, he replied, "JD, you should have been better prepared." His tone was light, yet every syllable carried a chilling certainty that hinted at deeper strategies at play. The retort was simple, yet it struck hard, leaving Vance momentarily at a loss for words. At that precise moment, the giant screens that loomed over the stage flickered to life, drawing the attention of everyone in the hall. Without any warning, new information began streaming across the displays. The images and texts were unmistakable, documents detailing Senator JD Vance's own questionable past. The screens revealed a series of incriminating files, evidence of Vance's secret meetings with powerful lobbyists, hidden donors whose identities had long been concealed, and records showing his consistent votes in the Senate that favored big corporations over the public interest. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The documents painted a picture of a man who had, until now, been the vocal critic of unchecked power. The narrative that Vance had so confidently built was now being challenged by irrefutable evidence of his own entanglements. The hall exploded into chaos. Gasps, murmurs, and exclamations filled the air as the audience struggled to process the revelations. The once dominant narrative had been upended, and every attendee felt the sting of betrayal and shock. Journalists, who had been meticulously capturing every moment, now furiously jotted down notes as their eyes darted between the screens and Vance. The flashing images of the documents created a relentless barrage of facts against him. It was clear that the carefully constructed image of the moral crusader was crumbling before the public's eyes. The documents not only undermined Vance's accusations against Musk, but also suggested that his fervor had been driven by his own hidden interests. The implications were staggering. Vance's face, already reddened by anger, turned an even deeper shade of red as the gravity of the situation sank in. His confident posture collapsed into one of disbelief and vulnerability. The man who had once commanded the stage with assertive declarations was now visibly shaken. The questions that had once been aimed at Musk were now swirling around him. The realization that he was being exposed began to reflect in his wide, startled eyes. In the midst of the mounting chaos, a murmur ran through the crowd, an undercurrent of dissent and confusion that grew louder with every passing second. The once unified front of Vance's supporters began to waver as they absorbed the shocking turn of events. The tension in the hall was almost unbearable. Every moment seemed to stretch into eternity as the scandal unfolded live before an audience that was desperate for answers. Behind the scenes, social media platforms erupted with real-time updates and heated debates. Hashtags and trending topics screamed out the latest developments. News anchors, in their rapid-fire delivery, speculated on the fallout. The balance of power had suddenly shifted, and it was no longer clear who was in control of the narrative. As the evidence continued to scroll on the large screens, the auditorium's energy transformed from fiery confrontation to stunned silence. The shock of the revelations left no room for further retorts from Vance. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of defeat and confusion. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, waiting for an explanation, a defense, or even a denial. Now, as the flood of questions began to pour in from every corner of the room, the once mighty Senator JD Vance found himself trapped in a web of his own making. The documents had laid bare the contradictions in his own record, and the public's trust was rapidly evaporating. Now questions are flying at him. Is this the end? Vance under investigation. Political scandal of the year. The announcement echoed through every media outlet as breaking news flashed across televisions and smartphones nationwide. The room, once filled with tense debate and heated accusations, now seemed to dissolve into chaos. Reporters shouted over one another, demanding clarity, while live feeds captured every unsettled expression and trembling glance. The media was in a fury, and the audience, once divided in allegiance, now found themselves unsure of whom to trust. The balance of power had shifted in a single, irrevocable moment. Elon Musk, who had calmly weathered the onslaught of accusations and strategic counterattacks, had now emerged victorious. As the final confrontation reached its climax, he stepped away from the podium. The lights dimmed momentarily before exploding into a barrage of camera flashes and intrusive questions. Without a backward glance, Musk exited the hall, his departure symbolizing an emphatic win in the battle for public opinion. The crowd's murmurs rose into a roar, a mix of admiration and disbelief, as he vanished into the corridor lined with flashing cameras. Moments after his departure, Musk's phone buzzed. With deliberate intent, he composed one final message, a tweet that would reverberate throughout the nation. In clear, unyielding text, he posted, "The government fears those it cannot control." That single statement was more than a tweet. It was a declaration that questioned the very foundation of the established order. The words spread like wildfire on social media, igniting debates in boardrooms, cafes, and living rooms across America. Across the country, Americans were left in a state of shock. Families gathered around televisions to watch the live feeds, while office workers huddled over their devices, scrolling through updates. The tweet, blunt and incendiary, challenged long-held beliefs about power and authority. It was a call to re-examine the system, a prompt that stirred public sentiment and invited a flood of reactions, from outraged protests to fervent support. The entire political and social system now hung in a delicate balance, its stability questioned by a single, electrifying moment. In the aftermath, the spotlight quickly shifted back to Senator JD Vance. The scandal had grown exponentially, and now, questions poured in from every corner. Who was JD Vance to cast accusations so confidently, only to be caught in the crossfire of his own secrets? Public opinion swung like a pendulum as political pundits and ordinary citizens alike debated whether his career was irrevocably damaged. Rumors and speculations raced through social media channels, and seasoned analysts wondered aloud if this was the end of Vance's political ascent. The once forceful senator now found himself isolated, his every move scrutinized under the harsh glare of investigative journalism. Within hours, several major news networks confirmed that federal authorities had opened an investigation into Vance's activities. "Vance is under investigation," blared headlines on every screen. The scandal was no longer just political rhetoric. It was a full-blown crisis that threatened to topple his entire career. As questions mounted in his past alliances were laid bare, the political establishment braced itself for the fallout. It was a dramatic reversal that left many wondering if Vance's meteoric rise had been built on a foundation of hidden alliances and shadowy deals. In the ensuing hours, public spaces transformed into forums for heated discussion. In cafes, on streets, and online, the debate raged. Would Vance stage a comeback, or was his political career finished? The atmosphere was charged with uncertainty, and every whisper of potential redemption was met with equal parts hope and skepticism. Political strategists scrambled to analyze every word of his previous speeches, searching for a clue to his next move, while his opponents prepared to leverage every misstep. As the night deepened, the nation braced for the next chapter in this unfolding saga. The echo of Musk's tweet and the dramatic revelations about Vance lingered like a storm cloud, promising that the battle was far from over. Every citizen, every journalist, and every political insider understood one undeniable truth.